Welcome to the Bitcoin Latam Report. Today it's a really special day. We have the pleasure to have Obi, the founder and CEO of Fedi. It's really random. We're really lucky here at La Casa to have such OG Bitcoiners, such entrepreneurs doing a lot of things. So welcome Obi to La Casa, and happy to
Thank you.
happy to have a little conversation.
Happy to be here.
So, we had a pretty interesting conversation off camera, as it always happens, but I think we can still touch on a few points. So maybe you can start by, explaining what brings you to Mexico City. I know you're doing a little Latin American tour, so just wondering what brings you here first.
Yeah, so I've been here since the beginning of the year. I started in Costa Rica. It was an incredible event where we were a number of human rights defenders and members of the HRF Human Rights Foundation community were just discussing what could the future hold for Bitcoin. And that was interesting. And then I went on to Colombia for a Bitcoin Medellin, which was the first time I ever went. First I went to Medellin, first I went to the event, met some really interesting people. And now I'm in Mexico. And in both places, Colombia and Mexico, I've been on a bit of a recruitment roadshow. This year, we are looking to significantly expand at Fedi. We're entering our final form. A lot of people see us as someone that builds this app, this wallet, privacy-preserving wallet that is incredible for communities and individuals, which is true. But the full vision, and we're now kicking that into gear, is we're building this Fedi order, this force of Fedi masters and Fedi knights to go around the world to locate, educate, and remunerate. So locate, educate, and support communities from around the world. And behind the scenes, we have people in marketing and in engineering, product, and business development that will support that process. We're building that sort of A-team of crack business developers and the senior members of the Fedi order. And so a lot of the stuff I'm doing here is meeting some of the people that we potentially looking to hire before bringing them on board. And from them, we'll be hiring others. So I'm really excited because there's a lot of talent worldwide, but an incredible amount in Latam.
I just had the idea that Fedi Order, it almost sounds like Jedi Order or some kind of stuff like that.
I'll leave you to come to that conclusion.
So before we talk about
I hope Lucas Arts and so on does in the Disney, I think nowadays doesn't.
Good. Before we talk about the expression plan, and I want to also talk about what you learned so far in Latam, can you just explain what is Fedi and how it started and what's the bigger purpose, the bigger mission? Also, why privacy is important. We talked a lot about that.
Oh, wow, there's a lot of different things. So first of all, Fedi, I think it's worthwhile separating Fedi from Fedimint, because a lot of people get those confused. Fedimint was the how it all started, and it's this incredible protocol that allows any group of individuals to come together and provide a service which gives members of their family, their friends, their community, incredible levels of private custody of their Bitcoin, and also a user experience which is as easy to use as the user experience of using an exchange. Like some of the top end, most reliable exchanges out there, or the biggest exchanges, or the biggest custodians, we take a best practice approach of allowing people to hold those communities to hold the money in what we call a federation, which is a form of multisig. And also like these, because the people who are securing each one of those keys, if they were to be public, would be at risk. We create ways for them to custody privately. So effectively, we provide the same level of service that you would get from using one of these custodians, but able to be provided at a much lower cost for your community or your friends and family. So that's what Fedimint does. It provides incredible levels of privacy, incredible, easy to use custody and features. So that's Fedimint. Now, Fedi is a private Bitcoin wallet, and it does a number of things. The first thing, it gives you private access to your Bitcoin, and it does that by using the Fedimint protocol. So connecting to a number of these federations. You can connect to one, you can connect to 100. But it also, on top of that, provides you private communication. And we use a protocol called the Matrix protocol. And finally, it allows you to access the web services that have been created by entrepreneurial Bitcoiners from around the world. We call them mini apps, all in one place, all with privacy without you having to think about it. And you don't have to trust us because the information is all open source and all available for everybody to see, including in the Fedi app.
You challenge, for example, Aureo. At the moment, we're non-custodial service, but eventually we also want to offer the services of custody. And your argument was basically, what's our protection that if we're using a centralized custodians? Then I responded, well, we know who they are, we can sue them, these kind of protections, but you're actually arguing against it. But somebody that doesn't know the power of privacy could think that because the key holders of the federation of however you call it, are private, it's actually easier to steal. But what are the incentives that actually make it harder, according to you, to collude and steal the funds of
Yeah,
the users?
let's remember there's three types of custody. You've got third-party custody. That's where you're custodying with some large institution where you don't necessarily, and so effectively I'd call that. So you're custodying with large regulated institutions. Then you've got first-party custody or self-custody. This is obviously the Bitcoin standard. This is the best way of custody, but it also can be daunting, scary to do. It can be technically complicated and it can be expensive to do. So that cuts out a large set of people. And what you have with Fedimint in the middle is federated custody, community custody, where members of your community come together to custody for their community. That allows you to have the same or greater levels of privacy as self-custody, because these transactions are also happening separate to on-chain. But it also allows you to have the user experience, which is the same or better than the user experience of using an exchange. It doesn't have the same level of self-custody as using, on the downside, it doesn't have the same level of self-custody as using as self-custody by definition. And it also doesn't have the same level of scale. You can't scale these things to the size of a Coinbase with. And I'm not sure you'd want that. We want a decentralized future. But that's where the centralized custody, third-party custody, wins over Fedimint. So it needs this point in the middle, similar to the point of a database, an industrial database versus a spreadsheet versus a notepad. A notepad is the simplest and easiest, and it's easiest to understand and learn, but you start hitting limits in terms of its usage. You could record your shopping list or so on, a simple spreadsheet there. And then you've got a database which can use to operate entire companies and so on. But a spreadsheet for small to medium-sized businesses is this balance between the two. And that balance creates a very new paradigm. And we're doing the same in terms of custody. Now, if you look, when people say, well, I'd like to custody with some sort of third-party custodian, a lending service, a broker, someone else easy buy and sell. Generally behind the scenes nowadays, and this has changed over the years, because they are effectively regulated, that means they have no privacy, etc. What you tend to find is over time, the costs to provide that service go up because of the increasing regulation, which means that small players can't really afford to do the custody themselves. And so they will tend to increasingly outsource to what we call qualified custodians. So a smaller and smaller number of very, very large professional custodians. And that might, and you think, well, these, why do we store with them? They will all advertise why they're the absolute safest place to store and custody. But let's look at what they do. First, they will use some sort of multisig. It can come in many forms, but they will use some sort of multisig. Why? Because at this point in time, that's the best way to custody large amounts of value, not have one key to all of it. You split it up. So they will use multisig. They'd probably also, to make you feel comfortable using them, separate those keys and the servers running them to be in multiple locations. Yeah, and the reason why is because if something were to happen to a location, earthquake, fire, etc., you don't lose all your money because it's split into multiple, or the custodian doesn't lose all their money and they have an obligation to keep it. So that's the second thing they do. The third thing they do is quite important, is the people who are responsible for each one of those keys will be kept secret or private. Their identity will be kept private. So for example, Coinbase is the big custodian. it's very likely that Brian Armstrong is not one of the key custodians because he's a very public figure that would put him and therefore I think the nearly $500 billion worth of cryptocurrencies they look after at risk. So they would have people within the organization that would be a closely kept secret. Their identities would be kept private. And that's to protect them. That's the people who are guarding the money, and to protect, and in so doing, to protect the users. So that's already the existing setup. And it may even be that they don't know who each other is. Okay. So this will be the same for all the other, take your pick, very large custodians. But if you think about it, if you're talking about a multisig where all the parties are in different locations and anonymous to each other, you've just described the Fedimint. But the difference was that Fedimint has been set up over 5 years to be very, very easy for anybody to be able to set up. Even a small family can set it up in a matter of minutes, running on very proprietary and very simple commodity hardware. Whereas these setups for these large custodians have been built up over many, many years and at a very high cost, and they're very bespoke and closed source and not available for others to see. So, but we've taken that. It's almost like someone's made a mainframe computer, and over time that was shrunk down to a microchip. And what Fedimint does is for best practice hot wallet custody, which is multi-signature, multi-locational, private, we found a way to shrink that down to the price and a cost point that anybody can access, so that everybody can have the same level of access that other people have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But you also said, like, the regulations are only going to pile up, and that's what's going to centralize the whole industry, and that's what is happening. But how do you prevent from happening this for Fedimint, for example, for Fedimints on a smaller level? Is it just because it's smaller, that's how they get protected against more regulations and more centralization?
Okay, so there's lots of things there. One, regulations, and it's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the nature of regulations. Very rarely do regulations get revoked and get cut out, and they normally just only add. And so, but each time you add, that adds additional barriers, additional costs. And so it becomes harder and harder to be able to meet those regulations. As it becomes harder and more expensive, fewer people can do it. So they naturally centralize. Smaller players change their business model from doing it all themselves to outsourcing some of the work to larger players. And that might be larger players for custody, larger players for payments. They might partner with PayPal as opposed to building their own payment network. They might partner with a Coinbase there's various different custodians, BitGo or so on, Anchorage, instead of doing it themselves. So that's just the natural state of affairs. And you can extrapolate, you can see it centralizes. But with federations, what we've done is provided technology that makes it very, very simple. So the cost can be kept very simple, and therefore you can provide it to far smaller groups for it to be cost effective. It costs you pennies or nothing to set this service up, and the skill required is enough where someone in your community or a few people in the community who are relatively technically savvy, similar level to running a Bitcoin node. If that's all it takes, then all of a sudden you can provide it to your friends, your family, your company. And many of those scenarios are exempt from regulation. It depends on the country, obviously. You would have to do your own research. But if for example, is a de minimis amount and the community size is small, like friends and family, often there are exemptions for things below a certain amount. For example, if I went to the shop and I was going to the shop now, we're in Mexico City, and you're saying, look, on the way to the shop, could you buy me a Snickers? Do you have Snickers here?
Yeah.
And Snickers bar, or is it still called Snickers Mars bar? I don't know. In the UK, it's called Mars bar. But if you ask, could you buy me a Snickers on the way to the shop? You shouldn't, though, because it's not good for you from a processed food point of view. But let's just say you did that. You would give me money, and I would go off and use that money to buy the Snickers from the merchant and come back and give you the Snickers. Well, I've just performed money transmission by doing that.
Yeah.
But you don't, it's because the amount is small enough and the relationship's personal enough and the frequency is low enough, there will be a consideration of the law that it's below a certain level to be required. I shouldn't require a money transmitter license to be able to take your Mexican pesos and buy a Snickers bar on your behalf. It'll be ridiculous. So there is this de minimis level. If you go below, the level is dependent on the country where regulations are either explicitly or implicitly not enforced. There's also scenarios that, for example, you could be a very large organization with 10,000 employees or 1,000 employees. And all of those, departments will have budgets, and you'll also potentially give expenses. When people are traveling, like I'm traveling now, I will have a company account where I can spend money for food, for drinks, accommodation. Very common thing. Lots of people who are traveling abroad for business have expense accounts. They're effectively spending the company's money on behalf of the company. So in that scenario, that's also not money transmission, because the money never changed hands. It never went from money transmission is party A helping party B pay for something for party C. But in this scenario, if party A pays for party B directly, that's not money transmission. Every employee of a company is considered part of party A. They're agents of party A. So if they are using party A's money to buy something in another country, that's not money transmission. Otherwise, every company who has an expense account will have to become a money transmitter. And some of these are quite large companies. It could be 1,000, 10,000, but it's still one legal entity. There are many scenarios, also certain scenarios, and again, it's location specific, where if it's only held for a specific purpose, where it's called closed loop system, where the money going in is only for the purpose of spending amongst a certain set of fixed merchants, as opposed to general. If those limits are enforced, that would be considered a closed loop system, like when you go to some department stores and you can get a stored value card and you can use that within the department store. That again is exempt from money transmission regulation.
Like Bitrefill.
Like Bitrefill, take advantage of that, and others. And there are certain federations which, in certain countries, where they take advantage of the closed loop system to be able to use Fedimints exempt from regulation. So, but then you just need to make sure the merchants are members of the federation, and the way you set up, again, it's country specific. So there are multiple ways where one thing that they all have in common is that these mechanisms don't really work at scale. They work if it's for one company, or it's a restricted set of merchants, or it's below a certain size, etc. Then they are exempt from regulation, which means that the end state for federations and Fedimints is not one huge federation that everybody uses. There's 100,000, 1 million, tens of millions of small federations and small, just like there are many, many millions of companies. They naturally decentralize.
Right. And do you, like in your dream, or at least in your predictions, and maybe you can do both. In your dream, how do you see the Fedi system? Is it like everybody is at least on one federation, some sort of federation, or multiple federation, and centralized exchanges don't exist anymore? Or is it a mix, not necessarily competing with centralized exchange or like this kind of services, but you offer a parallel system where people can use both? What's your prediction, and what's your dream?
I think if you just look at the history of communities and society, you see a pattern, and I have no reason to believe it'll be different for Fedimints and other systems. So let's take where people live and dwellings. That's custodying of the human body. The houses are mechanisms to house and custody humans. Yeah. You've got big cities like Mexico City. And what's the population of Mexico City?
22 million.
Yeah,
More.
so it's huge. That's approaching what's called a mega city. So you've got big cities, and there are advantages of having these big cities. There's much more constraints and restrictions of being in one of those big cities as well, because that many people around each other, you need traffic lights and so on. You just can't have open dope roads with no traffic lights. It's just too much. You need lots of structure and control. But there are efficiencies that you can get from those. And a lot of people around the world live in these big mega cities. Those are the equivalent, logically, to custodying, instead of custodying your people, custodying money in large, highly regulated, centralized organizations. And there's a place for that. And then you have hundreds of thousands, millions of towns, villages, and so on, which may have 2 or 3 or 4 roads in amongst them, and anywhere from 20 to 500 people living in them. And maybe they don't even have traffic light systems because it's small enough to not need all of that infrastructure and process. And if there's governance, it's just managed, each community manages themselves. You don't need a formal standard mechanism because it's so small and everybody knows each other, etc. And in terms of the total number of people who are living in those, I don't know the numbers, but I could imagine that more people worldwide live in combination in small towns and villages versus the people who live in mega cities. But mega cities individually are far larger. So those would be the equivalents of, and they'll have town halls and community governance, etc. They'll be the equivalent of what I see for Fedimint. And I can imagine that being anywhere from 30 to 60% of the people worldwide would be using something like that. And then maybe, and a similar percentage, but maybe opposite for the large custodians. So it could be 60 to 30 to 60% of those, but in combination, it could be 90% plus. And then you have people who have their own homestead far away from other people, their own private road to their own homestead. They secure it themselves. They protect it from beasts and potential burglars themselves. They potentially have to travel more to get to these other places, but they might be much more self-sufficient in securing if something goes wrong with the plumbing or so on. They fix it themselves. They manage it themselves because that's what you have to do if you're managing your own property. They're much less in number, but they also still exist because the level of freedom and self-determination you get is always the highest there, where you own your own land all around you, you're fully in control. But obviously, it's more costly to do that. It's more technically complicated. You need to be quite handy to be able to be so off the grid like that. And also, there's more risk. If if there was a fire in your house, you have to put it out yourself. The fire blades are not going to get there in time. If it's a village, you should have there'll be someone who'll be the fire marshal at least who's trained. And if you go to a town, you have an entire fire force, fire brigade, etc. So it's different levels of infrastructure. And many people like the convenience. Many people in the middle would like this balance between more determination at a community level of the future of your village or town, but some of the infrastructure and niceties of the larger village. And many people want full freedom, full liberty, and will go. So, but I would expect that to be 5-10%. I think that's to be in the States when it comes to property and land. And we see this repeated in many other aspects. And I think you can see it in car ownership. Many people use buses and trains to get around, but they have lots of regulations and structure and so on, but they send a large number of people. And then in the middle, and those are serviced, they're operated by third parties and serviced by third parties. And then in the middle, you've got lots of people using cars, but even though they are operating them themselves, they're not servicing themselves. They use more mechanics and so on and so forth to service them. And then you've got a few people who not only operate the cars themselves, but they service them themselves. They're fully self-custody of their car ownership. And again, I would say that's less than 5% of people who service their cars and do everything themselves. And I think it's going to be the same with custody of Bitcoin. Only a few people are going to do everything themselves, just because not only the cost, but also the complexity and the risk of doing that. Just like with a car, if you're serving this yourself, you have to be very comfortable with your technical capabilities before you take yourself, your wife, and your kids 80 miles an hour down the road. You don't want to just give it a go. But if you're competent, then if you've got the competence, no one can service your car as well as you, in terms of who cares about it as much as you, if you've got the skills. So
That's a fascinating analogy that basically the way we manage our physical self, it's kind of reproduce how we're going to manage our money. So as long you always have the option to live in your little pod in a big city, but you also have the option to go in the wild, even live off grid.
And it's also not an either or.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have the resources to have their own private house in the country, if you're fortunate to have that, and you'll have what's called a pied à terre. You'll have some sort of pad in the city, and you would use that for when you're working and day-to-day and interactions. And on weekends, you go back to the place for a longer term or for holiday in the countryside. And it will be the same for you might only keep a small percentage of your assets and properties and cherished items in your pad in the city because it's smaller and so on. But it's convenient for access, and the larger amount you might keep in your private resort or house or manor. And so it'll be, again, taking the analogy to money, you might store a large amount of your money self-custody and fully owned and controlled by you. And you don't visit it so often, you don't access it so often. And then Monday to Friday, most of the time you're using this city-based system, or you have this village-based system in the middle where you have more freedom and you still have access to similar services. You still have the post offices, you still have all the features and functionalities. And that's what Fedi provides.
Yeah, really cool. I need to think about that a little bit more deeper. So the advantages for someone to use the Fedi wallets are pretty clear. It's mostly about privacy, but also obviously great UX. That's what you're going towards for. But what about someone that wants to create a federation or someone that wants to create a community, which are two distinct things? So maybe you can give like what are the incentives for someone to start something like that? Are they monetary reasons? Are they ideological reasons, or a mix of both? Like, how do you usually?
So this short answer is a mixture of both. But let's take communities. These are the closest equivalent would be things like Facebook groups or Discord channels or WhatsApp or Telegram groups. But they're same, but different. That's a good friend of mine says, in the sense that you can take your group, the conversations that your group has, you can bring them into Fedi. You can bring over, if you have some sort of intranet or a series of pages or websites that you recommend to your community members, FAQ, you can bring those over into your Fedi community. And then you can invite your friends and community and family over to use that community. You don't have to have any involvement with the money side. However, because it's within the Fedi app, you can now, if you want to do anything that's of a monetary nature with your community, instead of having to educate them about many different apps, they can immediately, in the same app that they're having conversations, send value around to each other using one of the many federations out there and growing. They can hold some of their money there as well. Whatever they do, whether they're using one of those federations or they're just having communication, it's all private. The communication is encrypted. The use of apps, we try to select apps and offerings that protect privacy and limit the amount of KYC they need. It's not essential. You can have apps that have KYC, but we try to make recommendations for ones that limit KYC. And so that's the community offering. So people do that, one, because they want to provide their community a very simple to use service. And sometimes it's for ideological reasons as well. And also using these services, not just their users, the community members and the community leaders who are often part of the community save money. On the other side, you have federations. And again, some people set these up for ideological reasons or to support the greater Bitcoin ecosystem. But we recently announced and people have started having an offering that if you serve a federation, you have the ability to potentially set it up in a way where you earn some fee when people are using your services for payment. So if anyone in the communities out there decide to use your federation, it could be possible for you to earn fees from that.
Can you give some examples of maybe the top three communities you have seen that are really active? Or, I mean, probably you don't know necessarily which ones are the most active because it's all private, but you're traveling across the world for exactly these reasons to talk with people, to hear about the experience on the ground. So, can you give like specific examples of what worked somewhere else that could be applied, for example, here at La Casa de Satoshi, or for anyone listening, what they can do in their community to kind of get people going and start interacting between themselves?
So examples on what people can do. So I'll give you two or three. One is Bitcoin Indonesia, their incredible example. They, using their Fedimint, they set up every day. It's a closed loop system with a closed set of merchants. Those merchants are accepting Bitcoin, transactions are happening, it's being used all the time. That's one example of a community. They also do a lot of stuff around education, et cetera, for the Bitcoin community. And so it's relevant to things like the Casa de Bitcoin as well, and so to Satoshi, sorry, as well. So you could talk to them and learn from what they've done. And there are other examples of that, like Bitcoin Cassie and so on. But another example was during Africa Bitcoin conference, there was a federation set up by an anonymous set of guardians, and that one is where the guardians are anonymous. At the event, many people were giving out paper Fedi cash, and it was for this federation. And people set that up at the event, and they started onboarding lots of users. But since then, because there's sites that you can go to track the usage, etc., we see that usage continues to be quite frequent and so on. So people, federation that was set up just before an event, the anonymous guardians, and was promoted by giving out a little bit of eCash. You're seeing a lot of continual usage, and actually how they're using it, why they're using it, we don't know. We only are aware of that one because of the fact that it was done around the event. But otherwise, there could be many others like that that are fully private, because if they don't announce themselves to the world, not only are the users private, but even awareness of it existing will be private. A bit like a Bitcoin node. We only know about publicly advertised or broadcast Bitcoin nodes, but ones that are private, it's hard to know. And then the last use case is we work with communities around the world, but one type of community we work with are people living under the yoke of authoritarian regimes. And those are some of those are very, very active communities, but by their nature, we can't really go into details as to who they are. But those are very, very active communities. They're not public. We, again, won't know all of them, but we know a few in terms of initially helping them set up and so on. And I can tell you that those are very active as well.
I'm curious how these specific communities coming from countries where they might get persecuted, where probably there's also limited internet access. How do they find out about you? Did they reach out to you personally and they look for help?
We're very active in multiple communities. And so this is the other side of what we do on the ground. We locate communities, we educate them, and we support them. And most people are members of multiple communities. Yeah. So how many groups are you a member of on WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal? It's not just one group. You're probably a member of 10, 20, 100, 200. And so, and that's it. You're a member of your family community, your friend community, your football club, your company. These are all communities you're a member of. And so if you have a good experience in one place and another community is struggling with similar problems, how do we do something which is easy to use, easy to set up, all in one place? You could be making a recommendation to suggest, have you thought about this? And based on that, then because we have people around the world who can help, they can be put in contact and we can then educate and support.
Yeah, so, all the communities you mentioned, I don't like to use necessarily this term, but first world, third world are more like in the developing countries. And now you're doing a Latin American kind of tour. Can you share like what you felt so far in regards of the interests in Colombia, here in Mexico? I don't know if you visited other countries so far.
I've only just arrived here in Mexico, but I think it's a very, very interesting market. Colombia, there's people who came to that event from around the world, and not just from Colombia, but generally around Latam. And so that was an event to bring people from Latam to discuss Bitcoin. And one thing I felt there was lots of people had not heard from Fedi for a year or so. And the reason why was we already had a number of users, a number of communities, and we were getting inundated with feedback on since our launch, on how to improve the product. So we thought, well, instead of expanding and trying to get more people, it's already very clear that we've got to do this, and this to service the existing customers when you're existing tens of thousands of customers. So we've been working on that. But now we're in a situation where people's view of what Fedi is generally frozen in time. So if they saw it 2 years ago before we launched, they have one view. If they saw it just after launch, it's another view, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a bit like the analogy of the horse and the three blind men. And one of the blind men touched the tail and thinks it's a snake. One touches the body and thinks it's a rug, a carpet. One touches the head and thinks it's a cow, because they only have part of the story. So what was interesting is they started taking through different people through all of the things that Fedi can do now. And again, we can do this not because we build it all ourselves. It's because Fedi integrates the best freedom technologies together and then combines it with the human technology of community to empower communities around the world, to level up humanity. And when people go through the whole thing and see all the things it can do, not just the things they thought it could do, generally you see this sort of aha moment. And it's like, I can use it for here, I can use it there, I can use this in my community to do this and that and the other. And that's because it's only possible, not just because of the incredible work that the team has done, but it's because of all of the foundational technologies underneath that have been battle tested over many years, which when combined, mini apps, which are effectively web services that are Bitcoin focused, or Matrix for communication, or Nostr for communication and identity, or Fedimint, of course, for supporting privacy preserving Bitcoin payments. When you see it all together and everything that comes out as emergent from that, the reaction was really, really, really strong. To the point I almost came slightly unwell because I was talking myself hoarse with the people, with the number of demonstrations.
Yeah, so for example, a user might care only about the privacy aspect, but then a Bitcoin business owner might care about the mini app marketplace that you have inside the communities. So it's really kind of a lot of narratives to push at the same time. So how do you manage that challenge?
So I already said that we're going on this big recruitment drive, and but it's really key. But we're looking for lots of different roles, but most of the roles are in business development, marketing, UX, product, and on the ground field ops. But one of the recent hires that we brought on, and we wanted to wait till the product was mature enough, and we basically hit that in the level of maturity needed sometime in the last half of last year, because we were starting to notice that all the feedback and requests we were getting, the vast majority were either things that we already did, but maybe the UX didn't make it clear. That's a UX problem, not a functionality problem, or a UX challenge, I should say. Or the features aren't there, but they're already on the roadmap to be added very soon. So you already got it. It's happening. And once that was happening for 1, 2, 3, 4 months, he goes, okay, we've got the product. Now we're going to the next phase of growing. And that's what we're doing. But one of the people that we brought on was head of marketing. And I was after a multi-month process, and nearly 6 months to just find and whittle down. And we're very, very happy with what he's doing and what he will be doing. And he joined just over less than 2 months ago, I think, or just about 2 months ago. And there's a lot of exciting stuff in terms of making people aware of dealing with the challenge of making people aware of all the things we've done and all the things we're doing, where before we were just quietly working on it. So yeah, watch the space. There'll be a lot more stuff about what Fedi's doing and will be doing.
Do you think there is a lack of marketing or kind of leadership in the Bitcoin space? Crypto projects, for example, are really good at marketing. They're able to push their stuff to more people, and it's their product, or the mission is crap. But Bitcoiners tends to more focus on building products, but they also omitting the marketing parts, trying to go a little bit more mainstream. Do you have any advice for, let's say, building a mature product and then switching to kind of sell mode to any entrepreneur? Or
Yeah, I mean,
ourselves.
again, I think there's so much in that question. So I think, first of all, talking about altcoins and Bitcoin, and so I may not capture all the nuances because there's multiple parts to that question. But the one that first strikes in my mind is I would want to separate good marketing versus bad marketing. The first and most important thing is to just make sure you've got a good product and you're spending time talking to your customers, and you meet customers where they are and iterate on your product to meet the needs of the customers. A mistake I see in crypto and in Bitcoin sometimes is people have an idea they want for themselves and they try to make that idea because they think it's cool or they want it for themselves, and not because it's actually fulfilling a need for a customer. Now, it can get hard and murky because sometimes there's a need for a customer, but they don't yet realize they have the need. And it's a more challenging, complex scenario to do. But still, the intuition should be around the need for the customer. So, but I see that very frequently in altcoins and crypto. So I wouldn't want to liken marketing. Marketing can be bad and good. So I would want to avoid that. But then in terms of advice, one of the realizations and one of the things that's important about Fedi is that whenever Fedi goes into a community, we bring along a whole set of Bitcoin businesses with us. It's not just all about us. In fact, we're almost invisible. People don't necessarily need to realize using Fedi. If you open the Fedi app, other than the logo, which you can change and hide, and it might sometimes be good to know to do that. Within the app, there's very little branding that says Fedi, but we do brand all the mini apps, which will be from people at Bitrefill or many other companies, Aureo and others. They're the ones who are front and center. And so when you go into a community and the community leader decides, you know what, I want to move my community into Fedi, think about what happens next. Well, if I need lightning liquidity, I need an LSP or something to connect me to the internet. If I don't want to run that myself or I don't have the Bitcoin to do that, that means there's an opportunity for LSPs to help. They will run these on servers or somewhere. It could be self-hosted in your own house, or it could be in the cloud. If it's self-hosted, that means an opportunity for people providing node operating hardware. For example, the Start9s, the Umbrellas of this world, or cloud service providers like Nodana, etc. So they are needed. One way or another, you have to run it. And you could go off and get your old computer and compile it from scratch, but many people will say, well, at least let me get something like an umbrella to help. You'll need a mechanism to buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin. Again, this is where the mini apps come in. There will be people in your country and region for no low or normal KYC, depending on the country, but tools to be able to buy. As a community leader, you could tell them, go into your web browser and visit Aureo to buy Bitcoin. Or you could just within your homepage of your community in the Fedi app, have a button straight there for Aureo, which just because it's a built-in browser that takes you to Aureo in one fell swoop. But then when you want to buy, because it's within the browser, within the wallet can capture the request to buy and immediately make the payment without you having to jump between multiple apps and learn multiple user interfaces. So there's a market for on and off ramp providers as well. And then once you've got your Bitcoin, you go, what do I do with it? Do I use AI without giving away my identity? Do I buy a VPN or do I buy a SIM card that I can travel around the world in, or anything else? Do I look at a Bootsy Maps for a register of locations? These are not technically on off ramps, but they're services, merchant services, and so on that you can use. Again, instead of trying to give people a series of bookmarks, you as a community leader can make these recommendations within your community, so all your community members can add and use them. And even if you're not a member of a community, you as a user can keep your own custom set of personal mini apps that you think you access every day, all within your wallet without having to go to a separate site. So yeah, it depends, but that's what I'd suggest.
You mentioned a really important thing, like people spending their Bitcoin, earning Bitcoin. I think it's like a chicken and egg problem, because a lot of communities around the world will push merchants to accept Bitcoin, but then nobody's going to spend Bitcoin with these merchants. So eventually they just abandon it and they forget about it. So it's really hard to spin off both behavior at the same time. Like,
Yes.
what's your opinion, like honest opinion about it? Because we see it in Mexico as well. There's a bunch of communities that emerged last year, and they're pushing for merchants accepting Bitcoin, but then nobody is going to spend Bitcoin there. So, what's your take on this, and what's the solution? How do we go towards?
I have a take on this. It's different to what other people have thought about in the past, but I think you're starting to see signs of people starting to get this, and where you're seeing traction, they're seeing this happen. So there is volatility in between, but if you can hold money for that period and not look at it, then the likelihood it's lower, it seems to be very low. The other end of the scale is also true. For 5 minutes or less, that's effectively a medium of exchange use case. The volatility doesn't matter because it's so short that it's highly unlikely the price is going to change much in a few seconds up to a few minutes. So also volatility is not an issue for different reasons because you're holding it for so short. Here is long enough for the volatility to be irrelevant, and here is short enough for the volatility to be irrelevant. In the middle, that's where you generally have challenges for the everyday person in the street, if you want to talk about mass adoption. And so what they are showing us with their actions is that they're more comfortable holding value in stablecoins. Yeah. And what they're also doing is using stablecoins as a medium of exchange. But I would posit that if you have an ability to hold value stably, for example, with a stablecoin, but stablecoins have their own issues, but just hold value stably. And then when it comes to payments, convert from a stable value to Bitcoin, then you have access to the entire Lightning Network and all of the hundreds and growing number of web services that support Lightning to give you payment, but you don't have to deal with the volatility of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And from your point of view, if your app made that experience incredibly intuitive and invisible to you, then you don't even need to know you're paying in Bitcoin. You just know you have a fiat balance and you pay, but it's actually just converted and paid out. This is what Cash App announced a couple of months ago, and this is the plan for Lightning Labs with their Taproot assets, that you can have Tether on Lightning, but when you come to pay, it converts it to Bitcoin, so it's still within the network or Bitcoin. Then let's take the other side. You receive Bitcoin as a merchant, and you're trying to convince people to receive Bitcoin. However, and there's all these great aspects of Bitcoin. There's many people who can accept, who always want to spend Bitcoin, many, but some don't want to spend it for the long term. But once you accept it, it's a bearer instrument. No chargeback risk. No need instant settlement. So you can use that money immediately to buy your supplies. You don't have to wait 45 days. Your fees could be, especially with the Lightning Network, a tiny fraction of the fees for payment via credit card or debit card. Instead of 3%, it's 0.03%, for example. So, or 0.3% or something, but just a lot less, a tenth of the cost or less. So as a merchant, it makes sense to receive, but you don't want to deal with the volatility yet because you need the money to spend in a month or two. A fluctuation in the short term could be devastating for you. But if you could now invisibly, whenever you receive Bitcoin over Lightning, convert it into fiat value and store it as fiat upon receipt as well, you get all the benefits of Bitcoin, instant settlement, and so on. But the clients get the benefit of the Lightning Network and Bitcoin without having to deal with the volatility. Now, when you combine those, you can now have an experience where most users who are already buying things in fiat continue to buy in fiat, but they are invisibly converting to Bitcoin. It makes no difference to them because they're getting the same assets. They were going to that merchant every day anyway, and the merchant gives them a QR code to scan and pay, and they get their groceries. The following day, the QR code is now a Lightning invoice, and the app converts their fiat to Lightning, and the person pays. No change to them. So all of a sudden, all your customers can be switched over to using Bitcoin without having to change anything about their behavior. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, the merchant can accept Bitcoin without having to change anything about their behavior either. And so you can now get 100% of your users switched over. And why would the merchant do it? Because they're saving they don't have to take out a loan to cover the 45-day gap before they receive payment. So that's savings. They don't have to have a budget item for chargebacks. So that's a saving. They don't have to pay the credit card and debit card fees. That's a saving. When you add it all up together, it could be 5+% saving on every transaction. If it's invisible to the customer, I don't have to tell them anything. I just say, I'm paying in Bitcoin. And the user needs to change direction in no way. Then you've instantly converted 100% of your users over to Bitcoin, and you're using Bitcoin. Now, the merchant who's starting to receive this Bitcoin and converting to fiat will start taking some of it and using it to pay for their supplies, but they may start taking 1, 10, 20% of it and keeping it in Bitcoin for the long term. So what you end up having is Bitcoin for the very short term and Bitcoin for the long term. But as Bitcoin's volatility reduces over time, it becomes a shorter and shorter period before it's safe to know that it's going to go up in value. So that starts to squeeze. Also, as the volatility goes down in time, you can hold it for the short term for longer periods of time as well. So over time, that might take 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, doesn't matter. That bit in the middle, which is stability, guaranteed loss coin, as they call it, as opposed to stable coin, gets squeezed from both sides.
So your answer is basically create great apps and solutions that made
That are
always-
visible, that visible to the user. So the user doesn't have to change their behavior.
Yeah.
The merchant doesn't have to change their behavior. Don't try to educate them on Bitcoin. Just give them the benefit of Bitcoin without them having even knowing they get the benefit. The merchant gets the benefit of Bitcoin, which is all the benefits bar one, and that one is optional. But the others, they get the benefit of instant settlement. They get the benefit of no chargebacks. They get the benefit of lower fees instantly by accepting in Bitcoin. And they can choose to decide what percentage they keep in Bitcoin. If they don't have enough disposable income to keep any, they still got all those benefits and savings. And if they do have disposable income, they can put some in. So, and as the buyer, the buyer as well has an app that makes it invisible to them. They don't even need to know. They're not changing anything behavior. They went to the grocery store yesterday and they bought it in fiat. And today they went to the grocery store and they bought it in Bitcoin. They just thought they bought it in fiat. No change.
Yeah, it's basically that's how Aureo before it was called Swapido, and that's exactly that. We connected with the existing fiat system here, so people could pay with Lightning, but the merchant was receiving. It's not exactly that, but the merchant was receiving a regular bank.
Yeah, that's the off-ramp
Yeah,
side.
yeah, exactly.
So you basically did the second bit. Those are two announcements.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about Block is they're big enough an organization and they own one of the most popular payment apps in the United States. I think it's 40 million users. So it's like 1 in 5 people in the United States, and a much higher percentage of people under a certain age use Cash App to buy things every day.
Yeah.
And they also own Square, which is one of the number one point of sales. So they could do both sides.
Yeah.
But you need certain people providing the off-ramps like Swapido doing, or in Kenya, you've got Tando,
yeah.
or you've got Money Badger in South Africa, or Ghana has Bitspender, and more appearing. So that's happening. And that's the other thing I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of people doing the off-ramp. And that's great. But the use case for that is you're traveling and you're a Bitcoiner and you're traveling. And instead of having to sign up to these different things in each country, you can just Bitcoin and pay.
Yeah.
So, but now we need to increase the number of people who are able to pay in Bitcoin as well. And that needs the opposite service where I've got my local money or local service and someone accepting Bitcoin, and I can just pay for my normal local service and it swaps it into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And if you got the two, some people providing off-ramps by the on-ramps smoothly and automatically like that, then it's fiat to Bitcoin, bearer instrument, lower cost, no chargeback risk, instant settlement, back to fiat. Fine. And then you can just decide, you know what? I might keep some of that Bitcoin for myself, or this Bitcoin thing. When I look at the invoice, the amount of Bitcoin I need to buy this thing keeps going down over time. Why is that? That must be what they mean by the inflation and deflation thing. You don't educate them about deflation. They experience deflation. You let them experience. You can educate people about how driving a car. You can show them diagrams. You can show them pictures. But until they drive a car, very rare to be the person who can just read books and understand how to drive a car. The best thing is to experience driving a car. And it's the same. Let people experience deflation, the power of deflation. And that will be whenever they buy in fiat, in their invoice, they see the Bitcoin amount and they notice that their groceries, the Bitcoin amount keeps going down over time for the same amount of fiat or for a larger amount of fiat, because fiat keeps going up all the time. They literally experience the difference between guaranteed loss coin and guaranteed gain coin, Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's what happens in, I don't know if you've heard of Bitcoin Juggle in Costa Rica. It's a really successful kind of little community Bitcoin circular economy. And when they approach like the merchants in local markets, they were saying, just accept Bitcoin. For sure, there's going to be people coming over and paying you in Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, don't worry, come to me and I will exchange it for dollars without commission.
Which is what Swapido does as well.
Yeah. But then slowly over the months, as the first market, then it switched to 90% fiat. They kept 10% of Bitcoin. And after 1 year, basically everybody was almost keeping 100%.
No, you didn't need that educated. They experienced it. And that's why the merchants, that's why the offer is interesting, because they can now offer Bitcoin to people who have Bitcoin. But to your point, why your original point was bringing it back was that people don't want to spend their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And because they think it's going to go up. And so that's where the problem. And this is where you realize that people have multiple thoughts, sometimes contradictory thoughts, but they hold them in their heads at the same time without realizing that they hold these contradictory thoughts at the same time. Like an example, self-custody. People think, I don't agree with multisig. I think it should have self-custody. I don't want to share the keys with multiple people. I want to manage it myself. But at the same time, they then take their 12-word backup and give it to their friend, or they put it in a bank vault. In so doing, they're sharing their money with multiple people. They've just created a multisig. So a lot of people have created a multisig without realizing they're creating a multisig. Because the bank now has the ability to unilaterally, if a court order came to open up your vault, take your money. Or the friend that you're holding the backup with has the ability to take your money. You're having to trust them. So that would say you have one backup with a friend of your keys, of your 12 words, and one in the bank vault. You've just got a one of three multisig, which is a very unsecure multisig, because any one of the three can take your money. You just created an unsecure multisig. Should be ideally a 2 of 3 multisig, which you haven't created. So, but you hold those two thoughts. I don't like the idea of other people, not your keys, not your coins. And at the same time, you then give your keys to someone, so you no longer have your keys. So we do that. I mean, it's the same here. When people are buying, they say, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin, but you're buying food every day. You're paying your rent. That money that you used to pay could have been Bitcoin.
Exactly.
So it's Bitcoin and fiat, at least today with current regulation, is pretty fungible. So if you're spending any money, you're spending potential Bitcoin.
Because you're short Bitcoin.
You're spending potential Bitcoin every time you spend money. And if you're holding any money in a balance that's not Bitcoin, you're also short Bitcoin. So we have this view that I don't want to spend my Bitcoin, but you are spending Bitcoin every second that you have a non-Bitcoin balance. Every time you buy anything in any shop, you are spending Bitcoin because that could have been Bitcoin. Yeah, but again, people have trouble. They maintain these two thoughts and they don't realize that they're logically inconsistent. So then when you're saying, well, I don't want to, but it doesn't matter. We accept people where they are. When you realize that's the point, people have a real trouble spending their Bitcoin, but they have no problem spending fiat, which is actually still Bitcoin. That just hasn't yet been converted. It's Bitcoin that hasn't been converted into Bitcoin. And they have no problem spending that. So as they have no problem spending that, let them spend that and convert it instantly into Bitcoin. And then you problem solved, because that one people happily spend every day. I want to spend my fiat, which is basically, so let them spend their fiat, convert it into Bitcoin. And don't deal with the cognitive dissonance. Don't deal with the inconsistency. Just let them spend their fiat.
I think I understood that when I started working at Bitterfield like 3 years ago, because they offer the option for the employees to get paid in Bitcoin. And obviously, we requested that 100% of my salary get paid in Bitcoin. And that's really when I understood, like, it doesn't matter to spend your Bitcoin because I'm 100%.
Yeah, once you're 100% in Bitcoin, you have to.
Yeah,
you have to.
exactly.
But then you say, no, you know what? I want to keep, I don't want to spend my Bitcoin, so I'm going to put 50% in Bitcoin and 50% in fiat. Well, you just spend 50% of your Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time you kept 50% in fiat, that's the same as, it's the equivalent of putting 100% into Bitcoin and instantly selling 50%. You've just what you've done. It's literally logically the same. Because this is a really important point. Let's say someone gave you inheritance or gift, 1 Bitcoin, and for simplicity, it's worth $100,000. Don't want to do too much math, but just keep it very simple. And you received 100,000, 1 Bitcoin, which is worth $100,000. And let's say you can receive this as 1 Bitcoin or half a Bitcoin and $50,000. They're the same. But here's another way of doing this. I could receive 1 Bitcoin and immediately deposit half a Bitcoin to an exchange and sell it for $50,000. So So effectively saying I want to get half of my salary in fiat is the equivalent of saying I want to sell half my Bitcoin every month. So you are selling your Bitcoin every month by not putting 100% into Bitcoin. This is literally the same thing.
Yeah.
And so when you say I don't want to put my Bitcoin, I want to fiat, you have to think about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, personal question. Well, do you personally offer the option for your employees to get paid in Bitcoin or?
Yes, everybody can choose. They can change it on a month-to-month basis. I don't know how that scales if we get to more and more and more employees, but I'd love to scale that as much as possible. And different people can choose different things. The reason why it does make sense to sell some of your Bitcoin is it's easier to use fiat for accounting. It's easier to use fiat for paying for rent, etc., etc. Some people are fortunate to be in a place where they can pay for their rent, etc., in Bitcoin, and so people can choose.
And then there's crazy people like me that do 100%. Or
I don't think it's pretty crazy. I'm sure there's many people around the world that increasingly do that. But as you said, once you start receiving payment in Bitcoin,
there's nothing better.
But it has to be an amount. The only thing to think about is what are your costs for the month? If this is salary and you're receiving every month, then the wise thing to do would be to say, what's the percentage of things I need to cover my living costs and receive that in fiat, which is the same as saying, sell some of your Bitcoin for fiat to cover those costs. And the remainder you keep in Bitcoin. Some people will go, just do it fully Bitcoin and then hope. And some months you do well, some months you don't.
Yeah, exactly. I think it depends on the mood of. I did some months where I sold like parts for my usual costs, and then kind of gambled with the other parts of my costs. Sometimes it was going up, so that was good. Sometimes
it went down.
In the end,
and the question is, it's very hard to work out whether in the end you're worse off or better off on that bit. And it's hard to work out. So normally a lot of people have a lot of stresses in life, so you don't want to add to them. So for most people, the best thing is say, what is my budget for the month? And keep that in fiat and everything else in Bitcoin. But again, this is not financial advice. I usually don't talk so much about people's investment strategies and saving strategies.
I think we veered off the way a bit. So yeah, I know you're really busy. You came to work here. I'm really happy that you passed by La Casa de Satoshi. And this next weekend, by the time we're recording this, but it's gonna go out before, we're gonna do a big event at La Casa, and Lorena Ortiz, she's also OG Bitcoiner here in Mexico. She's gonna be giving workshops on how to start a Fedi community. So if anyone is listening, you're welcome to learn about that. And I hope next time you can also participate in a big event. So I don't want to hold you longer. So maybe closing words or any advice or anything.
I mean, this is all the cliche terms, but it's super true that we're at an incredibly exciting time. It's also an incredibly important time. Bitcoin, there's a phrase that Jeff Booth says a lot, that Bitcoin will win or will succeed as long as Bitcoin remains decentralized and secure. And it remains decentralized and secure based on the actions of every one of us. And so we cannot rest on our laurels. We have to keep working to make it decentralized and to make it secure. And security, one of the ways to get security is through privacy. This year, I think you're going to see a lot of things happening, not just for Fedi, and there's a lot happening for Fedi, but for many people in the space. I'm really excited about it. I'm more bullish than ever before, but I also recognize it's going to be a lot of hard work, and luckily we've got the right spirit and right culture of people to make sure that work happens to the best of our abilities.
Great. Thank you so much, Obi. La Casa de Satoshi is here to help. I hope Aureo will be back soon on the mini apps. And yeah, thank you again, and you're welcome anytime.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.